Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us with this session of the Data Doctor. Hey, this month, what we're going to look at are year-over-year calculations and year-to-date calculations. And these are the things that generate the most interest on my own blog. And I probably see these 2-3 times a week out on questions on the forum. They're actually not that difficult. And today we're going to take a look at 5 different ways of doing both the year-over-year and year-to-date calculations. We're going to start with some simple table calculations. That's probably one of the first things you learned. Then we're going to go on to my personal favorite, the one I recommend the most, is using LODs with some sort of fixed end date. And then we're going to take a look at how you can actually do a running type calculation. And you can look at how year over year changes on a quarter by quarter basis. Now, today, I only want to use a subset of the total Superstore data set. That's the data set that came with your copy of Tableau. The full data set's a little bit large and it gets a little confusing. Now, the data set that we're looking at only includes order date and category, and a little later I'm going to add subcategory in here to make it a little bit more complex, and sales. And that data would look like this. There's a couple of numbers here that you want to keep in mind that the total data set is 2.3 million US dollars. And if you take a look at the 2020 sales at $600,000 and the 2021 sales of $733,000, those numbers are going to keep popping up later in the presentation. Okay, let's get started. The easiest way to do a year-over-year calculation is with a table calculation. And you've probably done this. You just open up, drag sales to the viz, open up the caret there and do a percent difference calculation. And you end up looking at something like this. And it works fine. The percent difference is calculated year over year. So 8.4% is the percent difference between the 2019, 2018, and so on. And most users would look at this, and if all they wanted were those percent differences, they're done, they're fine. But most often when we get 2 types of questions, they look and they say, how do I get rid of this blank column? And they'll come in and they'll try to hide the column. And when they hide the column, 2018 sales disappears. Well, that's the nature of table calculations. That's the way they work. So that doesn't really satisfy their need. The other thing that happens is they come in and say, well, I want to filter this, so I'm just looking at the end date. And they say, well, I got the 2021 sales, but I don't have the year over year. And that's because as we've discussed before, they filtered out all of the data for 2021 or 2020. We take a look at the data table. There's no data for 2020. We filtered it out. Okay. So while using a table calculation is fairly easy to do, it may not satisfy your total need. Now, I want to go over and I want to look at using LOD expressions with different types of fixed end dates. And this is probably my favorite way of doing year-over-year calculations. And if you've ever posted a question out there and I've answered it, I generally tend to tell you, just go and do a LOD calculation. They're really fairly simple, and we're going to start by looking at the current date, year to date, based on today's date. And it's a relatively simple calculation. All we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the year of the order date and compare it to the year of today. And date trunc is just going to return the first date of the year. So January, if January 1st of the order date equals January 1st of today, or 2021, and the day on that order date is less than the day of today, then record the sale. And that's going to give us our current year-to-date sales. And we can also look at the prior year-to-date sales. And it would look something like this. And it's the same calculation. All we're doing here is we're taking a look at last year. And we do that by adding a date add function to the date trunc. And we're going to take a look if the date trunc of the order date is equal to the date trunc at the year level for today minus 1 year, then record the sale. And that will give us the prior year sales. And then we can just take the year over year sales, the percent difference. And I'm going to show you that calculation. Very straightforward, simple calculation. All we do is we take the sales for the current year minus the sales for the previous year and divide it by the sales for the previous year. And that's just some basic math, and we get values that look like this. And that's fine. And very often we'll get users who say, well, what I'd really like to do is I'd like my end user to be able to determine what that end date is going to be. So we're going to add a parameter. Whoops, I'm sorry. So we're going to add a parameter where the user can specify the end date. And the calculations are identical. All we've done at this point is instead of having today in our formula for the current value, we substitute in the end date parameter on the year and the end date parameter on the day. So now we can change the end date, and we do the same thing for the prior year. Okay. And this looks at last year on the same end date, but 1 year earlier, both for the year and for in the day calculation. And now we can change this date. We can come back in and we can change the date. And we can see that, sure enough, we're calculating the year to date based on the parameter value. Now, one other thing that users like to do is they like to come in and they say, well, you know what I'd like is I'd like to be able to change the I'd like to be able to change the level that we're looking at. I'd like my end user to be able to select year-to-date calculation or month-to-date and do a year-over-year or a month-over-month calculation. Well, we can do that. And to do that, all we have to do is we add another parameter, and I'm going to show you what that parameter looks like. And all we're doing is allowing the user to select whether they want to see the year-to-date or the month-to-date. And it's just a string value, and we're going to drop in the value we're going to look for is year or month. Now we're going back to that same calculation again. And then we've got two parts to the calculation. All we're going to do is read the parameter. And if that parameter is year, then they want the year-to-date value. And we're going to use the same calculation we just used. We're going to use at the year level, if the date of the year equals the date, the year of the order date, and if the date at the day level is less than the parameter for the enter order date, then record the sale. But on the other hand, if that parameter is month, then we want to come in and we want to check the value at the month level. And we're going to check the month of the order date, date trunk of the month of the order date. So that would be like the 1st of August or the 1st of July, for example. And the date at the day level is less than or equal to the date in the end date parameter. Then that gives us our prior year sale. And then we just do a very simple percent difference calculation. It's the same calculation we've done before. We're doing the sum of the current period minus the sum of the previous period divided by the previous period. Very simple, very straightforward. We tend to make a bigger deal out of using LOD expressions than maybe they weren't. They're just two calculations, and just need to know what level you want to look at and what the starting date is or what the end date is. Now, sometimes users want to look on a running basis. They want to see how that year over year changes over time. Well, the two methods we just looked at aren't going to do that for you. The table calculation we saw has problems with the blank field. And the LOD expression relies on having a fixed end date. We have to have a date that we can use to anchor the calculation. But if we want to come in and we want to do a dynamic year-over-year calculation, it requires doing something much more complex. And what we need to do is we need to make a copy of our data set and join it back to the original data. Now, there's some problems associated with that. I'm going to show you some examples that work, and I'm also going to show you an example that doesn't work and what you'd have to do to make it work. But let's start with the simple one first. Now, here are the data set I'm using. I expanded just a little bit. I wanted the category, the subcategory, and the year of order date in there, okay, and sales. And I made a copy of that data set, and I joined it to the original data. Now, what we want to do is we want to offset the copy of the data with the original data by 1 year. And we do that with this join condition here. We have the year of order date equals the year of order date plus 1. And to do that, you just create your own join calculation and enter it in. So we got the year of order date equals the year of order date minus 1. So we've offset them by 1 year. We want the subcategory level to match up. We want each of the subcategories to match the subcategory. And I've come back and I've put in the quarter of the order date equals the quarter of the order date in the copy of the data. Okay, so with that, I've joined the two files together and they're offset by 1 year, and we can come back in and we can take a look at what we've done or return what we've done. And I just did it like this so that you can see, at least to start, that sure enough, I've got the sales in the current year and the sales in the prior year, and sure enough, they're offset by 1 year. And you can say, yeah, prior year sales in 2018, go to 2017, 157,000. Yep, those are the values. And this is the number we were looking for. This $2.3 million is the total sales. But if we take a look at the prior year column and total the prior year column, because it wouldn't have 2017 data in it, it's $156,000. And all those numbers match up properly. And we can take a look at it a number of different ways. We can take a look at it by expanding this. And now it's going to get a little more complex. And I kind of wanted to avoid doing this right off the bat because, as you can see, the data gets to be a little difficult to follow. But once again, you can see we're offsetting our values year over year by 1 year. At this point, we can come back and then we can do a rolling calculation. And we can take our current year sales to get a year to date based on the current year. And we're just going to take the last three values. We're going to use window sum looking back 3 quarters for a total of 4 quarters. So this calculation sums the previous 4 values and then the prior year rolling sales just looks at the sales for prior year and adds those up. And if we wanted to look at those, we got the current year and we got the prior year rolling sales. And we can do a year over year based on those values. And we're just going to create the calculation. It's the current year minus the prior year divided by the prior year. And that's a percent. So we'll make it a percent. And we can add it to our chart. And you can see how those values vary year over year. And we can, rather than looking at a text table like this, we can look at a number of different bar charts. This is the year over year rolling on a quarterly basis. And if we wanted to do it on a running basis, we could look at that also. So we were able to match those values up because we were able to offset the year by 1 year. We were able to match up at the subcategory level and we were able to match up at the category level. And it's real important, and this is the most important part, is that data set is solid. There is a value for every combination of quarter, subcategory, and uh, and uh, and year, so that we were able to offset them. Now, unfortunately, that's not the way most data comes, and particularly when you're using an ERP system. An ERP system like SAP or Oracle is going to have a lot of voids in it. It's going to have a lot of blank spaces in it. And we refer to that as sparse data, and that's just the nature of ERP systems. They only record a value when a sale is made or when a transaction is made. So if nothing's sold today, there are no sales for today. And I want to show you what happens here when we've got that type of data and we try to make that same connection. Now, we try to make at the category level, we try to join the two categories together. We want to look at that 1 year offset. And because we've got data now at a monthly level and actually a day level, we got to join at the month and the day level, as well as the offsetting 1 year. And when we try to do that, this is what happens. Here's our 2.97 or our $2.3 million total sales. And we can look at the sales from the previous year, and we see this great big void in there, or null, of 1.2 million. We still get the same total, but you'll also notice that none of these values match up. And this null not only includes year over year, but it also includes categories that are not matched up properly. And the only way around that is to actually force a record into the data set for each combination of each combination of the date and the category. And I'm just going to show you how I did that. I've gone out and created that in Prep by making a date category scaffold. I started with all the dates from the first date in the data set. That's January 1st, 2018, all the way through 2022. And the three categories: furniture, office supplies, and technology. Created a Cartesian join by setting 1 equal to 1 in the two data sets, and created the Cartesian join to force all those records into the data set. Then came back and joined that data set with the original raw data and included all the dates in there from our date scaffold. And you can see here in red, these are dates that have been added to the data set, and there is a null value now in the data set, but the data is really there. And then I output that data to a CSV file that I could then go ahead, and we're going to open this up so you can see the data. Now I can join the data with a copy of itself and use the join conditions that we tried to use before, where category equals category. We offset the date by 1 year, month and day. And now the data will join together, and you can see there's a lot of nulls in this data set, but that's exactly what we wanted. We want those nulls in the data set so we can see that in 1 year there were no sales on the second day of January. In the other data set, there are sales on the second day of January. And once we've done that, now we can look at that data and we can see that sure enough, the data is offset properly. We can look at the year over year calculation, and we can drill down into that data both at the category level and at the date level. Now that's what I wanted to cover off with you this morning. There's 5 different ways, at least we covered all 5 different ways that you can do a year over year calculation. Starting with the easiest, which is just simply a table calculation, going under this very complex calculation where you're joining data sets and actually have to come back and scaffold the data. The method I recommend most often is to use an LOD expression and a fixed date. You can see when we have to join the two data sets together, that join condition becomes very complex very quickly. And if you're not really familiar with it, I would caution you to find somebody like your DBA who really understands how to join those data sets together to give you a hand. Okay, that's what I wanted to cover off today. Do we have a question?
So Jim, there is one question. Can you talk us about what is the difference between date trunc and date diff?
Okay. Hey, thanks for the question. Uh, I wrote this entire presentation up as a blog, and I posted it out on my blog site, and Sagar's got the link to that blog site. We'll look at it in just a second. And I started getting questions about using date diff instead of date trunc in my LOD expressions. And uh, the short answer is, yeah, you can use date difference. There's no problem using date difference in the calculation itself. But I want to make you aware of how date functions work, and you just need to think through that properly. Date functions return either a date or a reference to the date. Now, date trunc returns the actual first day of the period. So if I say date trunc year order date, it's going to return January 1st for each one of the order date years. So January 1st, 2018, January 1st, 2019, and so on. If I say I want date part year of order date, it's going to return an integer value, 2018, 2019, and so on. Now, that's not so impressive when you start talking about years, but when you look at months, if I say date trunc month, I'm going to get January 1st, 2018, and February 1st, 2018, and so on. If I ask for date part month, I'm going to get 1, 2, 3 through 12 for the 12 months. Well, what happens when you do a date difference calculation, and I'm going to show you this average ship date. I use this in a different presentation, but I want to show you what happens when we calculate this average ship date as soon as I can find it here. This is the date difference calculation that Sagar was asking about, and it's a date difference at the day level between the order date and the ship date. Now, the way this function actually works and what's actually calculated here is we take the date part of the order date at the month or at the day level and the date part of the ship date at the day level, and those are returned as integers. And then we take the difference between those two integers, and that's the value that you see here. And we could do the same calculation on a month level, and I can drop month in here. We can do the same calculation on a month level. And you can see that we're getting values of 0 to 1 and the like. When we do a date difference calculation, uh, you get an integer value back. You don't get a floating point number. Okay, if I take the date trunc level and I'm taking a look at the month level, I get the actual difference in months, and I get a floating point number that I can use in calculations. Now, you can use either one to do the year-over-year calculation. You just have to be real cognizant about what you're doing. For example, if I take the date difference in months and I had a shipment, or I had two dates, and one was the first of the month and one was the last of the month, like August 1st to August 31st, I'm going to get a zero back for the month. They both happen in the same month. If I'm using the calculation using date trunc, I'm working with the actual date value. So I'm looking at the 1st of August and the 31st of August. And then when I take the difference between those two values, I'm going to have 30 days. Okay. Once again, you can do it any way you want. Personal preference. I'm an engineer, so I like using the more detailed level of date trunc. Sager, does that answer the question?
Yep, thank you, Jim.